What does the other side of greatness look like? Is it this? Or this? Or is it this?
BJ Penn's UFC career is over.
BJ Penn is considered by many to be one of the greatest fighters of all time.
BJ Penn will go down in history as, without a doubt, one of the greatest of all time.
But now we see what awaits these legends on the other side of eminence.
Former UFC star BJ Penn was arrested yesterday for the third time in 6 days.
This video will explore the legendary career of BJ Penn, the highs, the lows, and the heartbreak.
BJ Penn was born to fight, man. That's what that kid was put on this earth to do.
Yeah, one of the best ever.
UFC champion BJ Penn has been arrested for DUI.
Fighting really is my whole life. It really is.
He's as legit and as badass and as real a fighter as you will ever meet in your life. I get goosebumps talking about it.
Before there was an MMA prodigy, there was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu one.
BJ Penn got his black belt in 3 years.
One of the only Americans ever to go win
The black belt world championships in Brazil, the Mundials.
You have like one of the craziest records of all time.
For people that don't understand how crazy that is, first of all, it's crazy to be able to get your black belt in 3 years. Then to win the Mundials as a black belt. There's only one guy that ever did that. That's BJ Penn.
People ask me, they say, how did you get a black belt in 3 years? Was it desire? Was it the dedication? Was it drive? And I always look at him and say, no, it was fun.
How old were you when you started?
17.
At 17, in 1996, Penn was introduced to Brazilian jiu-jitsu by a neighbor who had recently begun training under the Gracie family.
He choked me out and he arm locked me. And then right there, my mind started going. So I was like, man, with this, I could beat up everybody in Hilo. I'll rule Hilo, you know what I mean?
Penn was immediately hooked by the technical depth and effectiveness of BJJ.
And then I ended up competing in my first tournament. Then I tapped out everybody.
His ability to absorb techniques, combined with an aggressive, adaptable style, allowed him to dominate opponents in training and in local tournaments. Starting as a white belt in 1996, Penn earned his blue, purple, and brown belts at an unprecedented pace.
I started going up the belt ranks pretty quick. I went blue belt, purple belt. So in one world championships, I fought blue belt. And then the next world championships, I fought brown belt. And it was just, that's kind of unheard of because usually you go blue, then purple, then brown.
Penn's progression in BJJ was nothing short of extraordinary. Penn displayed an uncanny aptitude for grappling.
BJ started being very successful. He won a lot of tournaments. He was pretty much destroying everybody on the jiu-jitsu circuit. So
John Lewis was telling Andre Pederneiras, BJ's ready to fight black belt. Let him fight black belt. I look in there, he goes, we're going to do a selection today. You beat these two guys, I'll give you your black belt right now, and you're going to be on A spot to go into the Mundial.
The Mundials were the Brazilian World Championships. BJ had already won it the year prior in the brown belt category, and now his legendary mentor was giving him the opportunity to promote to and enter as a black belt. BJ grabbed destiny by the horns.
I ended up getting my black belt a week before the tournament. I had to do challenge matches with 2 other black belts in front of the whole school.
And then I won my 2 matches against the 2 black belts.
Wow.
Just 3 years after beginning his BJJ journey, Penn was awarded his black belt by Andre Pederneiras, making him one of the fastest practitioners to achieve this rank in BJJ history at the time.
we're like, what's the next level? And everybody's like, you got to go to Brazil.
I got a chance to compete in the black belt world championships in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
So BJ jumped on a plane and headed for Rio de Janeiro.
But I remember when I was going on the plane up there, I remember one thing. I was sitting next to a lady. I said, you know what? I think I found my calling. I think I found what I'm supposed to do in life.
A couple days after he got his black belt, enters the tournament, the first match. It's a tough match. He beats the guy in points. The next guy, real tough guy, is one of the guys we used to see on videos and try and mimic moves he does. BJ beat that guy. It was unbelievable.
When I got to the final, I was eating lunch, and you know what? That's a moment my brain just clicked in my head.
But I remember specifically telling myself before the final of the World Championship match,
you know what? You might never get in this position again.
It doesn't matter if my arm breaks or my leg breaks. I'm going to win this match no matter what I do because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm in the finals. And then I ended up winning the match 5-0 and becoming the first ever non-Brazilian to be the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt world champion.
The Brazilians couldn't even believe it.
I said you got a black belt in 3 years, but you also didn't just get a black belt, you won the world championships. So it's not like you just got a black belt in that time, you were the best in the world, and that's completely unheard of.
About 6 months later, around the time of UFC 31 in 2001, a friend of BJ would introduce him to the UFC top brass, including Dana White, to roll jiu-jitsu, but it was an encounter that would lead to a UFC debut with no, and I mean no, prior MMA fights.
He said, hey, I'm going to bring this young kid over and I want him to train with you. John went on to tell me that this kid was literally, I think he used the words prodigy, which ultimately became, BJ's nickname.
All I knew is that BJ Penn had come and rolled with us. He was very talented at jiu-jitsu, and we liked him, and we wanted him in the UFC.
And now, entering the octagon, this fighter is a submission expert.
First fight I went to, sold out, 2,500 people, Atlantic City. I mean, that's nobody, right? Small little arena.
The only reason why I'm stepping in the octagon is to be the champion. I'm gonna put him on his back and submit him.
I just thought I was at the top of the world. I was like calling home, hey, I think I'm gonna be on TV, watch, you know.
Phenomenal grappler, he's really good at submission.
Nothing compares to fighting in that octagon. The first time in there, you were fighting Joe Gilbert.
5'5", 155, lightweight. My strengths are my wrestling and my toughness.
Joey was, he was tough. He had his thing.
Then I ended up fighting Joey Gilbert.
Yeah,
and that's
and
how
you blew up in the UFC quick. I think because you were already so known from jiu-jitsu. I remember there was so much hype you came in.
There were high expectations for the BJJ world champion. The question was whether he could implement his ground game in this new frontier.
Let's go, come on. Here we go, in the lightweight category.
They expected you to go in there, shoot him, take him down. Joey Gilbert had a wrestling background. No, you were one of the first jiu-jitsu guys to be like, all right, I'm going to work my jiu-jitsu, but first I'm going to put these hands on you. You boxed him up, you took him down, and you strangled him. Am I missing anything with that?
Well, yes, Matt, because he didn't strangle him. He beat the ever-living shit out of him.
After I fought my first fight against Joey Gilbert, I talked to Dana and I was only 2 or 3 fights away from becoming the UFC lightweight champion. All I wanted to do was become the lightweight champion, beat Jens Pulver, and retire.
BJ may have crushed his first opponent in a dominating and unexpected way, but those 2 or 3 fights that would get him to Jens Pulver and the lightweight world title were not going to be easy. There was a tank of sharks to swim through, and the next in line was a big problem. Din Thomas was an absolute monster, 12-1 as a pro, having only lost to top lightweight prospect Cal Uno and riding a 7-fight winning streak that included the future lightweight champion Jens Pulver. Din really did stand as the pinnacle of the division at the time, but we have to remember, BJ had only had 1 fight in MMA, and now here he was, facing across the octagon from a 13-fight veteran. BJ really was just chucked in against the wolves.
Tail of the tape. This highly anticipated matchup between the 24-year-old Dean Thomas, the 22-year-old BJ Penn. Everything else is absolute.
I had this premonition in my head. I was gonna fake the right, and he was gonna dip his head and run right into this left hook. I've been dreaming about it. I've manifested it.
Let's see what happens.
I visualized it.
Din felt that he was destined by the universe to land his left hand, but BJ had one answer for manifestations. At 2 minutes and 42 seconds into the very first round, BJ separated him from consciousness with a beautifully timed knee. The UFC had brought BJ in for his grappling prowess, but the Hawaiian native was instead cementing his early legacy in the sport with hands crafted on the violent streets of his homeland, living and breathing his ancestors' ancient warrior past. No wonder really that quickly, BJ was making a very marketable name for himself. In just 2 fights, BJ had finished 2 of the best the UFC had to offer in the lightweight division. He had proved his worth despite being so young in his career, and so the UFC put together a little title eliminator with the man who had fought for the inaugural lightweight title earlier in that year and had rebounded with an emphatic TKO win. This was it. BJ's dream was just 1 fight away. He had to make this happen. Cal Uno was at a very young age Already a Japanese superstar, making a name for himself on the other side of the globe as a world champion in Shuto, he had joined the UFC with a record of 12-3-2, making his debut fighting for the inaugural lightweight title against Gents. As we know, he would fall short in this venture, but would bounce back later the same year, picking up his first UFC victory by way of knockout. This had meant that he had kept his position as the second best lightweight in the company, and so naturally, this meant if he could secure a win over BJ, he too was within touching distance of the title once more. Everything was on the line.
Lightweights, Carl Uno against BJ Penn, the winner to fight Jens Pulver for his belt.
But BJ didn't want to hang around. If you ask fighters what their favorite moment watching this sport was, many of them will say
Carl Uno. Carl Uno. Carl Uno.
Carl Uno.
Carl Uno. Flew him flying knee, boom, he knocked him out.
It was like 15-second, he squatted that, knocked him out, and sprinted out of there, his work was done.
This guy says, hey, you gotta see him, his hands, his knees, everything is working. This is a ground guy, and he comes in and he starts knocking people out. Dude, I was a fan instantly.
At 11 seconds of the very first round, for the winner, BJ Penn.
Carl Uno sprinted out of the gate with a flying kick that did just about as much as what you would expect it to. BJ dodged it, and clearly inspired by this move, thought that he would deliver a speed run of his own. After squaring up for a couple seconds, BJ sprinted forward, one hook as a misdirect, then gave way for a devastating uppercut that laid Uno out on the canvas. BJ didn't stop till the ref pulled him off, landing super necessary ground and pound that froze Uno like Elsa. BJ had done it. After less than a year in the sport and 3 destructive knockout finishes, BJ had arrived at the feet of the lightweight title. The man holding it was future Hall of Famer Jens Pulver, the first ever man to call himself the lightweight world champion, and who had defended the title just once. He was also a man who had rarely seen defeat in his 14-fight career. His victories had more often than not come by way of finish. Whether he was beating you into unconsciousness or strangling the life out of you, it didn't matter. And BJ was just another would-be victim of this young star's burgeoning legacy. BJ saw it differently though. BJ wanted to run through him and make it look easy, snatch the crown, and become the youngest UFC champion of all time, and then fade into obscurity.
Is 5 rounds for the UFC Lightweight Championship of the World.
For 3 rounds, the fight was an absolute barn burner, one of the best fights you can go back and watch. The first 15 minutes crescendoed when seconds before the round would come to an end, BJ grabbed a hold of Jentz's arm and ripped it back in a beautiful armbar, something that Jentz would actually tap to. But the buzzer had already sounded, meaning that the fight continued. But from here, Jentz would take over. The 5th round was a wash, and the fight had clearly slipped through the Hawaiian's fingers. BJ's dream of beating Jentz, grabbing the lightweight title, and then sailing off into the sunset were dashed against the rocks. And in his own words, if it wasn't for that loss, the BJ Penn story that we covered to this day would probably never exist.
I wanted that lightweight championship belt, and I wanted to put that thing on my dresser right next to my jiu-jitsu gold medal. And I knew that this isn't easy. If you want something, you got to work for it. And that's one thing though. I look back on that loss to Jens Pulver. Mixed martial arts wasn't done with me. If I would have won that fight, we wouldn't be sitting here right now doing this interview.
And I was still so close, I said, I might as well, I can't quit yet.
He headed back to the UFC very quickly. That would come in the form of Paul Creighton, a fellow Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt who had earned his UFC debut after stringing 3 victories together on the regional scene. The UFC pitted the 2 BJJ aces together, a matchup that promised an exciting ground game chess match, but that is not exactly what we got. It took 2 rounds for BJ to TKO his opponent, sliding out of the losing column and cementing himself back on the road toward the title. Paul Creighton, on the other hand, after just 4 fights in MMA and only 1 in the UFC, would never fight in the sport again, retiring after a destructive barrage from the Hawaiian. After Jentz had successfully defended his title for a 3rd time, becoming one of the sport's most winningest champions of that era, Jentz rightfully questioned his pay. When he faced BJ, Penn had been given 20 to show and 20 if he won, whilst Jentz, the reigning champion on the other hand, had been given 13 to show, 13 to win. This led to a massive contract dispute that resulted in Jentz leaving the organization behind and heading over to the other side of the globe to fight. a move that didn't really go in his favor. This meant that the title was now vacant and ready for a new man to claim. The UFC put together a tournament, the first in over 4 years, the first leg of which was expected to take place at UFC 39. Caol Uno was to take on Din Thomas, and BJ was set up against Matt Serra. The fight, however, would end up being a complete slog. BJ would gas out in the third, and Matt Serra didn't really have anything else either. The whole round was booed start to finish. BJ did walk away with the victory, but it came at the cost of some very negative fan backlash, and it was the start of a very obvious gap in BJ's training, a man who would admit that he simply didn't even train or eat properly ever, a thing that, as we will see, would plague his career until its very end. This victory, however, would give him the ticket to the title. Caol Uno had won his fight against Din, and now the two were ready to fight for the vacant title. And this is the man, by the way, that BJ had destroyed in seconds. To say he was feeling confident would be an understatement.
Take me through that fight, man. How's that gonna go? It's gonna go just like the last one. Nah.
Tonight we're in Atlantic City. It's Caol Uno. It's BJ Penn. The lightweight belt is on the line.
But the fight again was a complete slog, an underwhelming bout of ground and clinch work that lacked divisive moments. Whilst the fight this time around did not result in continuous boos from the fans, it was a pretty lackluster performance from both men. The crowd was essentially silent the whole time. When the final buzzer had finally sounded, the commentary team were confident that BJ had walked away once again, able to call himself champion.
It looks to me as if BJ did enough in the first and second round, and in the fourth and fifth.
But that's not what happened.
This UFC lightweight championship fight is considered a draw.
The draw had devastated BJ, saying in his autobiography that he was sick to his stomach and disgusted mentally. Many had felt that BJ had deserved the strap, Lorenzo Fertitta even stating that he would send out the belt to BJ as he did deserve it. After the controversial draw was called, the UFC made the decision to cut the lightweight division entirely. Not only would there no longer be a belt on the line in the division, but they would also no longer be putting on fights at 155 pounds altogether, meaning that BJ, if he wanted to fulfill his contract, had to move up to welterweight. With the UFC falling silent after that, BJ took matters into his own hands. His brother had made a fighting promotion out in Hawaii, a promotion called Rumble on the Rock, co-promoted by K1. Rumble on the Rock, as the name suggests, was all about putting exciting fights on the Hawaiian Islands. BJ wanted to stay at lightweight, and with the UFC not accommodating this matter, he called for Japanese legend Takanori Gomi to come over to the US and to fight him in Rumble on the Rock. Takanori had just lost his Shuto Lightweight World Championship, but until that point, he had been an undefeated submission artist. The fight, which would contest the Rumble on the Rock Lightweight World title, was essentially what BJ considered to be the fight to determine the real best lightweight on the planet, seeing as the UFC had abandoned the division completely. Dana White, according to BJ's autobiography, gave his blessings for the fight to take place, as long as Penn promised to return to the UFC after. And let's just say, we as MMA fans should be grateful for this, because what was allowed to take place was an absolute barn burner.
He's the man right now, 155 pounds. He's the #1 ranked fighter in the world at 155 pounds. And tonight, he's going to try and prove it in front of everyone.
We got 3 minutes left in this round. Left hand, right hand by Gomi to the inside.
Both guys land. Gomi throws the jab.
Nice single leg.
Nice. That's my height.
Gomi to explode. There it is. Locked it in. Magalhaen's locked in. Is he going to tap? He's going to sleep.
BJ would finish Gomi inside 4 rounds, cementing himself as the top lightweight of the era. But as promised, he now had to head back to the UFC and fulfill his contract, and that meant moving up a weight class. BJ didn't want any old fight though. He wanted to beat the best the UFC had to offer.
So we tell Dana, of course, BJ wanting to have a challenge and wanting to have something to get excited for. And at that time, there's a person in the welterweight class, Matt Hughes, who's just destroying everybody. I think he was at that time maybe 28-1. He just was strong wrestler, farmer boy. UFC didn't have anybody to fight him all over the world. He fought everybody they could bring in, and nobody could beat him. So I called up Dana White. I said, BJ wants to fight Matt Hughes. He goes, you're kidding me. I said, no, I have him right here. He wants to fight him. He says, you know what? Let's put that together. I like that fight.
You can imagine that when Dana put down the phone, he turned around to Lorenzo and was like,
He says, I want
Matt Hughes
in Russia. Is he f***ing awesome?
BJ may have had the heart of a lion, but that didn't change the fact that Matt Hughes was a monster, the current welterweight champion, and it was pretty much everyone's opinion that BJ didn't stand a chance against him, but they don't call him the prodigy for nothing.
BJ on top of him, punching him from his back. BJ's got incredible back control. BJ looking for the choke. He's got the choke. He's done. It's over. It's over. We have a new welterweight champion. A new welterweight champion. BJ Penn. He's so dearly
You work so hard for something and you finally get down and
BJ, so many people doubted you going into this fight. They thought that Matt Hughes was too big. Did that help
I remember back then after we beat Matt Hughes, looking back in lightweight and welterweight rankings, we were #1 in both of them, in welterweight and lightweight. Did anyone ever do that before?
After claiming the belt in such an incredible way, up a weight class and up against an unbelievable legend, you would think that BJ, now fulfilled in his initial purpose of becoming UFC World Champion, would move on from the sport as he had promised. But, well, we all know the story didn't exactly go like that.
By the time I finally work my way back up and I fight Matt Hughes and I become the welterweight champion of the world, and at that point, I was in too deep. It was my identity. I couldn't get out after that.
Now as UFC champion, and with a fresh contract to sign, you can imagine that the UFC was ready to put their money right at the feet of this insanely young and insanely marketable MMA legend. He had plenty of tread left on the tires, and with a performance that many hailed as the greatest the sport had ever seen, all eyes were on BJ for his next performance. So Dana White must have been naturally ready to give the kid a great new contract, right? Right, guys? Anyone? The story goes like this. Whilst in contract negotiations, it would transpire that BJ had actually seen his contract end a month before he had ever even fought Matt Hughes, and so he started to negotiate outside of the UFC in order to get a fair price for his talents. K1 offered BJ $187,000 per fight if he were to leave the UFC, an incredible amount compared to the $20,000 he got paid to fight Hughes. Then at an airport, he bumped into one of the 250 comedians left in the world, Joe Rogan, and they discussed his contract. Upon landing on the other side of America, BJ's phone was being blown up by Dana White, who was pissed that BJ had even dared to look elsewhere, even threatening legal action, and said there would now no longer be any pay rise altogether.
Their version of the story is complete and pure.
I guess that he had forgot that the contract had already expired, and so you can imagine what happened next. After destroying Bas Rutten's prodigy Dwayne Ludwig, Penn would take any fight he could, and in any weight class that he could.
Judges have scored this bout 30-27. For the winner by unanimous decision, the pride of Hawaii, the prodigy, BJ
BJ may have been stripped of his title, but that didn't stop him over the course of a year competing up and down weight classes from openweight to middleweight in Japan, showcasing his tenacity to test himself despite his size. BJ would defeat Dwayne Ludwig, Enzo Gracie, and Rodrigo Gracie, and unfortunately drop a fight against future light heavyweight champion Lyoto Machida. His Asian expedition was exciting to say the least. After this, an ongoing legal process with the UFC had come to an end with regards to BJ's contract, but it was ruled in favor of the UFC top dogs. But it did give an opportunity for Dana and Penn to sit down and hash things out.
And it kind of came to the point where we were sitting down and we're like, you know what, Dana, let's just put this thing back together. So Dana's like, these are the rules, these are the steps, let's sign the contract right now. We're gonna announce that BJ's back in the UFC tomorrow night, one of our biggest UFCs.
I think that our 170-pound division is probably one of the most exciting divisions in the world, and I just signed a guy who's gonna make it even more exciting. Check out the new welterweight I just signed.
Wow! BJ was brought back into the fold, and his return match was against GSP, a man on his second run in the UFC after falling short to Matt Hughes. This fight was booked as a title eliminator, the winner of which would be granted a shot at Hughes once more, who in BJ's absence had reclaimed the welterweight strap. But the fight didn't go as expected. Over the course of 3 rounds, BJ again gassed out as his ground game had been completely nullified by George, who sat heavy on the Hawaiian and wilted him down with top pressure. The victory was ultimately declared as a split decision, as BJ had pieced up the Canadian on the feet, completely destroying his face. On rewatching the fight though, I think that it was a pretty clean victory for GSP, but back then, many had felt that it was a robbery, particularly because GSP looked like he had gone 3 rounds with a swarm of hornets. The result didn't sit well with BJ, who fell into a pretty dark place.
After the St-Pierre fight, I fell into a pretty deep depression because I hadn't really lost a fight for a little while and stuff, and then so I was still same thing I did before the St-Pierre fight. I did right after the St-Pierre fight. Went to the bar, hung out, with all my friends, and did exactly the same stuff.
And sometimes, at our lowest moments, the universe steps in to pick us back up.
JD calls me one day and he says, St-Pierre tore his ACL, he hurt his knee. You're it, you got the shot, you're in. You versus Matt Hughes. First thing came to my head. This is destiny because St-Pierre didn't win that fight. I remember driving down the bayfront right here, kind of looking out to the beach, looking out to the ocean, and kind of was almost like kind of tearing and thinking, I'm going to be the world champ again.
However, the fight was at extremely short notice, and according to his autobiography, BJ would only train for less than 2 weeks, which isn't saying much when the man barely trained anyway, and this really showed in the fight. For the first time in his entire career, BJ would be finished inside of the cage.
It was the first time in my career that I got finished. I just lost 2 fights. Everybody must be thinking my career's done. I was even questioning what now, and the depression just got worse.
But sometimes we need the darkness so that the light can shine brighter.
We were continually having to try to convince BJ to stay on a path. In our path, we said, look, for you to become a legend, it's not going to be you stepping up a weight and fighting a Lyoto Machida or fighting somebody bigger than you or doing all those other things. Focus on the 155-pound division and clean it out.
With a new trainer and a new focus, BJ would return to the fight game, and this time was to prove a point.
I'm not going to be one of those guys who shoulda, coulda, woulda, been great. I was going to do it.
In a rather symbolic way, BJ's return not only physically, but mentally as well to the sport was in the form of a rematch against the first man ever to beat him, the man responsible for giving us the fully realized BJ Penn story, Jens Pulver. This fight would be built up through a season of The Ultimate Fighter, where the pair act as opposing coaches. Season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter was an absolute blast, featuring some of the best future lightweights to come, Nate Diaz, Gray Maynard, and Joe Luzon. After an exciting show, one of the best to be honest.
Yeah, man.
People, when they see Andy winning, they don't say, he's a punk, they say, hey man, this is a warrior.
BJ and Pulver were scheduled to face off at The Ultimate Fighter season final in June of 2007, and it didn't take long for him to not only get his revenge, but to do it in spectacular fashion.
With the choke. That's soft. That's soft. It's over! BJ Penn chokes out Jens Pulver.
With the star getting a fantastic win in the lightweight division, there was only one place to go for BJ, and that was to the top. But we got some catching up to do with this weight class first. The UFC had gone around 10 events without lightweights between UFC 50 and 60, pretty much because of the fact that BJ and Uno drew in the contention for the lightweight throne, but they had returned the division in BJ's absence whilst he was at K1. Sean Sherk would go on to fight for the title against Kenny Florian at UFC 64, where he would win the belt, and then he would defend it once. But it was in that first defense of his title in July of 2007 that Sherk would test positive for PEDs. At the time, testing positive didn't mean an immediate stripping like it does now, and so a massive hearing took place for months to decide whether he had intentionally cheated or not. Because of how long this process was taking, the UFC put an interim title on the line for Joe Stevenson and BJ Penn, and this was to take place at the start of 2008. But in December of 2007, the decision was finally made to strip Sherk, meaning now that the January bout was going to be for the vacant championship.
Inside the Metro Radio Arena, it's BJ Penn, Joe Stevenson. One man will leave with a belt around his waist.
He's got the choke.
Here we go.
That's it. That's a wrap.
It is all over. BJ Penn is the UFC lightweight champion.
The fight was electric. BJ drained the blood of Stevenson all over the canvas before strangling the life out of him, and then in celebration did the now legendary licking the blood off of his gloves, an absolutely horrific thing to do. BJ was once again champion, and more importantly, a 2-division champion, the third in the entire history of the company. And no matter what from this point, he had cemented himself as one of the greatest combat sporting icons of the world, the fastest BJJ black belt, the first American to win a BJJ world tournament, a welterweight UFC champion, and now a UFC lightweight world champion. But despite all of these accolades, there was still someone running their mouth.
I'm not afraid of BJ Penn. I think he has a couple big holes in his game, and I'm sure he thinks I got some in mine too. So
Sherk was going around telling everybody that I'm not the real champion. I fought for a fake championship and he's still the real champion. He was getting upset that I kept telling everybody that he was a coward and all these things because he was taking steroids.
But BJ would make short work of him too, flying kneeing him at the end of the third round as the buzzer sounded. And then in one of the most badass things that I've ever seen in this sport, BJ waved off the fight himself, telling the ref that Sherk was done.
Wow, it looks like BJ called the fight. BJ Penn remains the lightweight champion.
But it was his post-fight interview that got everyone's attention.
You've talked many times in the past about having a rematch with George St-Pierre. What are your thoughts right now?
Do you want GSP? Do you want BJ Penn to fight GSP?
And that matchup was simply too damn good to pass up on. Poster boy versus poster boy, reigning champion versus reigning champion, which I believe is the first time to have ever actually happened in the UFC, a rematch of the split decision, and BJ's third shot at welterweight championship glory. Since beating BJ, GSP had been on an absolute tear, winning the welterweight championship, had a little slip up, and then working his way back to it again, defending it once against John Fitch. GSP had aged like fine wine, and so this fight wasn't going to be easy for BJ at all.
You got a big fight on the horizon. You had to wait a little while for GSP to heal up, but I think it's going to be, this one's big.
This is the kind of fight that you wait your whole career for.
BJ Penn has the potential to hold 2 belts. If he wins tomorrow night, will truly make him probably the best pound-for-pound fighter in mixed martial arts.
Yeah, they're both in their prime. They're both world champions. They're both 2 of the best athletes to ever compete in the sport, mentally, physically, emotionally in the right place, and they both want to finish each other.
It's your title that's on the line, George. It's not BJ's title. So if you lose a belt. If he loses, he's still got a belt at the 155 division.
When I walk in there to fight George, and there's just going to be one thing, just going to be constantly going through my head. To the death.
The mentality of the Hawaiian warrior mentality that he has, he means exactly what he says. He would rather die than lose.
He said a lot of bad things, you know, a lot of things that he have said, it's not nice about me.
Is this turning into a personal situation, or is it turning into a fact, you know what, I've got to make a statement in this fight?
It's nothing personal, it's business, you know?
If BJ can pull this fight off on Saturday night, he'll be the first guy in UFC history to hold 2 belts at the same time.
They both say we're the best in the world. You know, talk is cheap. Let's find out January 31st.
be dominated for 4 rounds straight, with the fight ultimately being called off by a doctor going into the 5th. BJ falling short in his career once more. But this fight is known for something far more controversial, a conspiracy that ripples through the MMA sphere to this very day. There is a reason why cutmen are now UFC employees, and that is because of Greasegate.
The situation with BJ Penn and GSP with the Vaseline incident in GSP's corner.
Controversy in the BJ Penn fight, a fight which he dominated. Greasegate.
I'm not saying GSP greased, I'm just saying he was slick.
I didn't know what happened because I wasn't in the fight. So when you're in a fight, you don't realize what happened.
And not to say that what happened was George St-Pierre was intentional or anything.
Cheating is stealing, and you're stealing money off somebody's table, you're stealing food out of their mouths.
And I think BJ Penn, if you want to be a better fighter, you should have focused on things that he has the power to change.
Do I think that he got greased? Yeah, I do. Absolutely 100% think that guy was rubbing grease on him. Do I think George was trying to cheat? Absolutely not.
The truth will always prevail and come out in the end.
Whilst it remains alleged, most people are absolutely convinced that this happened. There are tons of video on YouTube showing BJ slipping off of GSP whilst he played his offensive guard, confirming to most that George was in fact cheating. After the fight in the locker room, commissioners of the fight claimed that they had also caught GSP greasing during the fight, opening a legal case.
I saw him putting grease on his body. If you watch the second round, you'll notice the effect that grease had on the body. St-Pierre was able to slip in and out of his guard.
Anyway, despite the evidence, the case was denied, snubbing BJ. Instead, the Hawaiian was forced to drop back down to defend his lightweight title.
I have to defend my UFC lightweight championship, and that will happen, I think, late July or early August.
BJ would defend his title 2 more times against the division's brightest and best, former title challenger Kenny Florian, who was on a 6-fight winning streak, and then Ultimate Fighter Season 1 winner Diego Sanchez. Both victories were just signature bloody and gutsy BJ Penn, Joe Rogan even declaring at the end of the Diego fight that BJ was the greatest lightweight that had ever lived.
That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the greatest lightweight in the history of the sport.
And in most senses, this was actually true. Since losing to Gents, BJ had gone on an 8-year undefeated streak at lightweight, only losing in a division that he simply did not belong in. And even when you look at BJ, it was pretty clear that he probably didn't even belong at lightweight. He was always outsized, yet dug deep to win every victory. His fights were electric and brutal, and if his career had finished with the stoppage over Diego Sanchez, I think many people would look back and truly question what was possible for him, a similar sentiment that people share with Khabib. But as we know, this story doesn't end with glory. In BJ's 4th defense of the lightweight throne, he would be matched up against Frankie Edgar for a bout to take place at UFC 112. Frankie was a tenacious bulldog, having lost only 1 fight in his entire career. He had climbed to the pinnacle of the lightweight division and represented a fantastic challenge to BJ. Frankie was a superb wrestler and sharp enough on his feet. Although the New Jersey native was counted out, he would prove to be the pin that popped BJ's balloon.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for a decision. Doug Crosby scores the contest 50-45. Saudi Amato scores it 48-47. And Andy Roberts scores the contest 49-46 for the winner. And new UFC lightweight champion of the world, Frankie.
The fight was a back-and-forth slugfest, a grueling competition both on the feet and on the ground, and whilst many had thought BJ could have walked away the victor, it was ultimately Frankie that stole the strap, ending BJ's legendary streak at lightweight, and well, to be honest, irrevocably changing BJ's life forever. Many people mark this as the real end of BJ's career. A couple months later, they would rematch, but it once again didn't go BJ's way. An even more dominant decision in this outing. Then, BJ would retire outside of the octagon, posting on his own website that it was time for him to hang up the gloves. To everyone's surprise, he would return 2 months later to face Matt Hughes, where he would put on an incredible performance. But to be fair to the performance, It was just two old guys at the tail end of their careers going at it in the cage. The win was simply a rose nestled amidst the thorns. BJ, already considering retirement, was half in, half out, and maybe that knockout gave him hope. I don't know. But that ambition would be drowned out with a draw against John Fitch.
Ladies and gentlemen, this bout is a majority draw.
And then a 3-round beatdown courtesy of Nick Diaz that left BJ busted and bruised. Most people were mortified to see the smacks that he took during that fight, and rightfully, in the cage, BJ retired from competition.
Joe, it's probably the last time you're ever going to see me in here. I can't keep, I want to perform at the top level. That's it, Joe.
But after spending almost a year on the sidelines recovering from the loss, BJ returned to take on up-and-coming young Canadian Rory MacDonald in a fight that was simply difficult to watch. BJ was pieced up at every opportunity, losing by 30-26 on multiple scorecards, a complete lopsided victory, one in which he took countless punches to the head that he should never have been in there for to take. At this point, many people called for BJ to retire for real this time.
BJ is too tough for his own good, but the shots that BJ took would have knocked out a normal human being. He's had his head bounced off the canvas like a basketball. BJ Penn has left that octagon looking like a fucking alien. He's taken a lot of damage, and I don't want to see him take any more.
It really was enough, and let's be honest, he had accomplished everything that he could in his career, already leaving a lasting legacy. This latest escapade up to welterweight was fruitless, and in an interview with Helwani, BJ Penn seemed a little lost after the defeat.
We haven't seen you in action since December. You kind of hinted that you were going to walk away. Give us an update. Are you going to come back, or are you done with MMA?
I'm still just hanging out. Honestly, at this moment, my guess is probably a little better than yours, but I don't know. I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
Tell us, how did this all happen? How is BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar going down, and how at 145 pounds?
All of a sudden I get a text from BJ Penn. BJ Penn texts me and says, "Hey Dana, I want to fight Ben Henderson."
In September of 2013, it was announced that BJ would be returning after his brief hiatus. It was announced that he would be making his featherweight debut all the way down from his last fight at welterweight, to first coach alongside Frankie Edgar on a season of The Ultimate Fighter, but then lock horns with Frankie in the summer of 2014. The move to featherweight did make sense for BJ. Frankie had already shown that this bared positive results for the smaller guys at lightweight. If BJ won the fight, I'd have no doubt that the UFC was setting up a shot for BJ at the featherweight throne. But as we know, this story doesn't get any better.
Frankie Edgar just continues to shift gears. Really putting the pressure on BJ Penn right now, landing shot after shot.
And if BJ Penn doesn't work, Herb is going to stop this fight. Frankie Edgar finishes the legend BJ Penn.
After 3 brutal lopsided rounds, BJ would be stopped via TKO, and thankfully this time, he announced that he would be permanently retiring. The punishment that he had taken in the last 4 years since losing his title to Frankie back in 2010 was just uncalled for, and at every turn, people had asked him to quit. But I guess warriors don't see things the way that we do. It's why we love them, I guess, but it's also hard to watch.
This is the end. I'm thinking to myself, why did you step back in the octagon after the beating that Rory MacDonald gave you? You know.
He's one of the best 155 pounders of all time. He built that weight class. He built that weight class, and he was responsible for helping build the UFC. That's his legacy.
4 years after losing his title, BJ stepped back from the fight game, lamented as one of the few men that helped shape the UFC, a legacy that many fighters will never have. A brave warrior amidst the few, retiring with a record of 16-10-2. His last few fights, absolute brutal wars that, more than likely, would have taken years off of his life. And now he saw that there was no path forward in the fight game, not unless he was willing to take unnecessary life-altering punishment. And so that was it. A year later, he was rightfully inducted into the Hall of Fame, a perfect punctuation point on one of the greatest combat careers the sporting world had ever known.
And the number one people I gotta thank, made it all possible, is the fans. Thank you guys, I love you guys. Thank you everybody. Thank you.
Except, we know that this story doesn't end on a high note. A year and a half after his exit from the sport, BJ was lured back to the bloody waters of MMA, the siren song of violence, calling him to wade deep into the waters of combat. A story told too many times, men half in, half out, that offer themselves up to unnecessary physical punishment, men way past their prime, trudging forward into the octagon despite not having the same motivation, the same dedication, and the same athleticism. But BJ felt that he had more to prove. After some failed scheduled matchups, who do we think that the UFC matched BJ up with? Well, they gave him an absolute monster in the form of Yair Rodriguez. In the first card of 2017, BJ Penn was scheduled to face the Mexican on a terrifying 7-fight win streak that included winning the Ultimate Fighter Latin America and some of the flashiest and devastating finishes that we have seen in a while. Rodriguez was heralded as the next UFC superstar, and so, 14 years his rival's senior, BJ Penn stepped into the 8-sided cage, and it went exactly as you would expect.
Round 2 here. Down goes Penn. Rodriguez wins. That is it. El Pantera Yair Rodriguez has done it.
Immediately there were calls for BJ to permanently step away from competition and retire again. But for a further 2 years, these cries fell on deaf ears. BJ carried on. June 25th, 2017, BJ loses a majority decision to Dennis Siver. December 29th, 2018, BJ returns to lightweight, but is quickly submitted by Ryan Hall. May 11th, 2019, BJ loses a decision to Clay Guida. Despite calls for BJ Penn's retirement once again after his loss to Guida, and in turn setting the record for the longest winless and losing streak in the promotion's history, these calls to see some kind of justice given to Penn would go unheeded in the UFC's head office. Instead, BJ was rumored to be linked to a grudge match with Nick Lentz at an undisclosed UFC event toward the end of 2019. But 2019 wasn't going so well for the Hawaiian legend. In the early part of the year, a successful restraining order had been filed against him by his ex-girlfriend and mother of his children. The main complaint of this order was that BJ had spent years physically and abusing her. The restraining order, whilst implemented, would never be explored legally beyond this, and so it's worth noting that this behaviour is only alleged. A few months later, BJ would be involved in a street fight with a bouncer. Obviously I can't show the footage of it, but it was becoming increasingly obvious, at the tail end of his career, that he was losing his grip on a healthy lifestyle. It simply just wasn't a good look. The nail in the coffin of BJ's failing MMA career and his worrying behaviour came just 2 months later in August of 2019, when a very disturbing video was released of BJ in a street fight. After subduing a person that has later been identified as his actual friend, BJ led him back to his feet and asked him to punch him in the face undefended. The friend, that from what I can tell in my research was a former boxing legend of the island, threw a punch that obviously knocked BJ clean out, and in his unconsciousness would smash his head on a concrete floor behind him. I have to say that when I first saw this video, I was absolutely devastated. It was the first time in the 3 years at this point that I'd been watching the sport that I got to see someone that I'd grown up to be inspired by be so, I don't know, lost I suppose. It was disturbing. I don't know what to say much beyond this. This type of behaviour, in my opinion, is reserved for those of a lesser character, not a legend. And here I was seeing a man renowned in the sport engage in such saddening conduct. Naturally, the UFC was quick to release a statement saying that they would never let BJ fight again.
BJ Penn's UFC career is over. UFC President Dana White told ESPN he will not offer the 40-year-old another bout in the octagon.
But after what I saw on that video, BJ needs to, he needs to focus on his personal life and get himself together.
And so it was. A legend of the UFC and the sport in general had his career ended without ever placing his gloves down in the octagon. The commentary at the time was that BJ was clearly suffering from alcoholism brought on by CTE-like symptoms. His behaviour simply did not make sense, only further backed up when, early the next year, BJ was arrested on DUI charges after crashing his vehicle, flipping it, but luckily not injuring anybody. No official charges were filed. But again, it was just even more evidence for those that felt that BJ had had more than a fall from grace in the sport, but a fall from grace in his life also. At the end of 2020, a lawsuit was filed against him from a mother of his children again, and then a month later after that, BJ was arrested again on DUI charges. In a video released, we see him cuffed and slinging around racial slurs. Most modern fans of the sport can see the similarities between this and Tony Ferguson, who recently seemed to be following the same trajectory, and we all know how that made us feel in our hearts. Luckily, Tony was able to turn that around earlier this year, but BJ, I guess, wasn't so lucky. I say this to give context as to how old school fans must have felt seeing BJ in this most saddening of positions. After cleaning up his act for a few years whilst he pursued an unsuccessful political career, BJ entered the news cycle again for not so great things when, 4 years later after his last arrest, he was again charged with domestic abuse charges. This came at the tail end of a month-long social media tirade, which I'm sure most of you have seen, and it can only be described as heartbreaking. I'll play it here.
This lady right here, look at her ass and legs. She's acting like my 79-year-old mother. But she's not my 79-year-old mother. And it's interesting when you Google Lorraine Abelais, our house pops up, because this lady acts like Lorraine Denoy. So you Google Lorraine Abelais, and this house pops up, and then you look and then my mom's name starts popping up. She's trying to steal everything, and this is not my mother. And I'm putting this up because she's saying that she's going to get an attorney and try to do something. She's trying to throw me out, and if I attack her, she'll try to do something, TRO or something else, but she's...
I'm not a doctor, you're not a doctor, but it is my opinion, and many other people's opinion, that this is just clearly CTE, and that is just heartbreaking. It really is. He is a legend, and here he is, kneeling at the feet of a brutal career, broken mentally, broken physically, and we sat on the sidelines watching a decline in real time. I remember watching BJ on a podcast run about 7 months before this actually happened, and the man just seemed like a shell of his former self, ranting, mumbling, incoherent at times, and unable to keep track of what he was talking about. I may be painting a dramatic picture with this last statement, I guess, but it's just what I felt when I watched it, only for all of this to be affirmed 7 months later. I do truly hope in my heart and in my prayers that this is just a momentary lapse, a brief mental break, and that BJ can get healthy again, and I'm sure that you will join me in that. I've seen fighters decline. I've seen the haze descend upon their eyes as time begets their fingerprints. I've seen the blood that fell from men locked in brief moments of violence dry upon the canvas, and then be wiped away after the lights dim and the crowd disappears. But what endures are the stories of legends that once were, even though their legacies fizzle out in anticlimactic, sorrow-filled displays. It's those moments of unrivaled success that remain eternal. Perhaps that's what makes this dingy corner of the sporting world so inspiring, that men brave it all to be remembered by so few, to be witnessed by the minority, and yet they valiantly sacrifice it all in the name of conquering, in the name of glory, in the name of selfish yet admirable eminence. In a sense, we all share a moment with them, knowing all the while that it is brief. One moment the belt glimmers, and the next, well...
Former UFC star BJ Penn was arrested yesterday for the third time in 6 days. The 46-year-old was first arrested on May 25th for allegedly assaulting his 79-year-old mother by taking her mail, shining a flashlight in her eyes, then shoving her into a vehicle.
It was hard for me to get out after being in there for 20 years. I mean, that's your identity.
Yeah. Well, BJ, when you were on top, you were one of the baddest on earth. You really were. You were a guy who went all the way up to heavyweight to fight Lyoto Machida.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you did some wild shit, dude, and you were strangling a lot of people, man. Yeah. And for jiu-jitsu guys, like for all my jiu-jitsu guys, you were the man, because you were a smaller guy who choked out Matt Hughes, you know, who was so good at the time, man. And Matt Hughes was a tank. When you got his back and choked him, everybody's like, oh shit,
jiu-jitsu's
like,
back.
People forgot. They forgot those times, BJ. I always tell people you have to judge a fighter by the heights they reached, not where they fell afterwards or the up and coming fights. You got to judge them by the heights that they reached.
And there was no one tougher, no one more outsized or outgunned, no one more courageous. Life ebbs and flows. Legacies are defined by their peaks.
Critics and fans ask me all the time, BJ, do you think you did enough with the talent you had? To them I answer, no, I didn't do enough. I did way too much, more than I ever wanted to do.